and the translation and localization industry that supports it. So we breathe, eat, and drink globalization and localization 24/7, which is really actually pretty exciting for us. With the box that I had Udi bring up on the left there, I just want to point out that we're objective and independent. We have no stake in any technology, vendor, or service, and we're working with buyers, and you can see suppliers and freelancers and academia to get as much information about the industry as we can so that we can give it back to you. On the right there, Udi, if you'll bring that up, we produce very systematic research. In other words, we don't only survey or interview our client base once or twice a year. We bring it back to you in several different forms through blogs and through subscriptions to research. So anyway, I just wanted to point out to you how we get this data that I'll be showing you in a minute. And I'll leave it there. Udi, go on ahead and you can move to the next slide.
Great. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. So a little bit about the presenters today. As for myself, I come from the software industry, not the language industry. And what I've been very excited about throughout my career is taking new technology innovation and making it useful and interesting and valuable to global business. I've done that in the telecom space quite a bit. I've done that with big data analytics and artificial intelligence for global telecom companies. And today, I'm very excited about having found a niche that combines both big data, artificial intelligence, and communications to resolve yet another very critical problem for global business. And I will let you read the quote from Rebecca.
Well, for me, I get up every day. I swear my family thinks I'm a little bit crazy sometimes, but I get up every day looking at my work from the point of view I can help people not reinvent the wheel and not figure out how to go global. Every day is another opportunity to help all kinds of companies do it better and to reach their customers around the world. So again, I'm like Udi. I'm from a different background. I'm from the software industry, and for me, I just want it to work as seamlessly as things can for people according to their languages and cultures. So that's what gets me up every day, and I'm really passionate about that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rebecca. And with those introductions out of the way, I'll hand it over to Rebecca. I think I'll hand it over to Rebecca.
No, I think no. I think that you have a couple things, Udi.
Not yet. I guess not yet. Okay, so I guess I'm still in introduction mode, and again, maybe don't rate me later. So a couple of important notes to kind of set the scene for what we're about to discuss. It's obvious today that machine translation becomes a business imperative. The need to do business around the globe is dependent or directly related to the amount and type and availability of digital content. There are less boots on the ground. Today, there are less companies are less inclined to opening local support offices, support centers, sales force in each country and territory, and consumers are actually more interested in having fast access to information that they can digest themselves. So machine translation becomes a great tool in making that happen. There are still some myths or maybe incorrect understandings about what machine translation is or what it can actually do for business. Anything from machine translation is just not good enough. We can't probably use it. Our consumers actually expect something else. They want to see perfect translations, otherwise they will not talk to us. The reality is actually quite different. The linguistic quality is paradoxical, which is really the topic of our discussion. Oh, this is running away from me. Because consumers are the ones that are driving translation quality acceptance, and many companies are trying to improve linguistic quality when their consumers are looking for something else. They're looking for immediate access to useful information, not so much the actual quality, or at least the definition of quality varies dramatically between what consumers want and what companies are still introducing. And that's as a result of Web 2. You can blame all sorts of things, everything from social media to to mobile texting, to the usefulness of online translation tools that people just got used to being able to understand the general notion of what their colleagues and vendors are telling them. So it's really about the consumer at the end of the day. And the other thing that makes MT adoption increase at this point in time, going into 2015, I think is going to be a very exciting year, because consumers don't just demand information in their own language and demand it now, but they also increase the tolerance for imperfect language. So MT becomes a must-have for global business that sees now an estimated 75% of global revenue dependent on language, if you can imagine that. It's this has been presented by Common Sense Advisory as part of their research, but has also been confirmed by companies like eBay doing their own research and others. This is a huge number. It does not mean that you cannot go into global markets speaking English, but it means that you're basically giving up in advance 75% of your addressable market. So why is there this misperception of quality? And this is where I'd like to hand it over to Rebecca.
Thank you.
And let her lead with her research.
Some data. Yeah. Thank you, Udi. To highlight what Udi has just presented, I want to cast the challenge of the burgeoning increasing number of languages that all of you in the audience face as it applies just to website content. And if you'll bring up the graph there, Udi, many of you now deliver products and services in 11 to 20 languages at first release, or whatever you're doing, whether it's software or another kind of product or service. But the list of languages is different than it used to be 4 or 5 years ago, and it often includes not only various flavors of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, but Indonesian, Russian, and Turkish as well. Based on research which we did for a report entitled the Global Website Assessment Index, we found that the top 50 most popular websites worldwide average around 18 languages. So if you bring up the orange box there, Udi, you'll see that I just want to point out one thing. The column says 15 over there to the left, and that's because we looked at lots of different indices. But when we look at Alexa, the top 50 required an average of 18 languages. And this was about a year ago, so it's probably even gone up since then. It can be a real challenge for both translation buyers and language service providers to guarantee an acceptable level of quality for all of these languages simultaneously. And the issue becomes a paradox as you, as a company, throw more and more money at it, expecting it to make a notable difference, but then it really doesn't in the end for consumers. However, the real challenge you face is how your team can let go of the downstream linguistic QA process in order to have a much greater impact on quality upstream, and that's what I want to talk about a little bit. So if you'll go to the next slide, Udi. So let's talk about how you can do this. At CSA Research, we've been working with our clients over the last year to enable them to recognize linguistic quality as a paradox in 2 areas. And the first one is where they often only focus on it at the end of the multilingual content delivery process. And worse, the second area is they either don't define quality or they define it using the wrong criteria. So here are the 5 areas that we review with them. The first one's up there, or the first 2. The first one is to recognize that large QA budgets don't necessarily equate to meeting customer quality preferences. The second is there will often be conflicting views of quality both within your organization, with your customers and prospects, with your language service providers. And the third one is adding external resources and money won't necessarily solve the problem. Number 4 is the imperative to reconsider your quality goals. And to do that, number 5, you need to reach out to your prospects and customers directly. So let's take a look at each one of these in a little bit more detail. So on the next slide, we'll take a look at large QA budgets. Many buyers, almost 70% of them, you see the 68% of them up on the screen now, based on our data, don't believe that quality goes up when they pay more for translation, including additional linguistic quality reviews. Udi, if you'll bring up the next 2 for LSPs, for language service providers and freelancers, you'll see that there's quite a difference. On the people who are producing this stuff, they think that there is a large difference. Now, there are several reasons for this, and we've got data that goes into this, but we don't have time in the webinar to go into that. But what I want to point out is that a lot of companies throw money at this, and it's not solving it. They still think that they're paying more but getting the same quality back. So language teams, whether on the buyer or supplier side, tend to spend a lot of time and money on linguistic quality. Worst of all, the investment in quality is often made with no input from real prospects and customers, and it takes place at the end of the process through linguistic quality assurance programs in the form of multiple in-country reviews. So let's take a look at the conflicting views of quality on the next slide. And Udi actually alluded to that in his introduction. All these little Lego men and women will come up in a second, and there's a big wall between them, though. Unfortunately, a translation team's definition of high quality, even though vetted through service providers, local partners, or in-country reviewers, does not always match the prevalent view held by their prospects and customers in a given market. If you maintain a large stable of internal or external reviewers who apply more or less the same quality filters, regardless of content type, to most local markets, you can almost be sure that you're spending probably more money than you should on quality reviews. At the same time, your company may be failing to meet local market expectations worldwide. So again, as Udi pointed out, you've got quality on the side on the left from the localization teams who are responsible for lots and lots of digital content, but you have availability of really usable content on the right, and that may be internally your teams, it may also be your customers and prospects. And the key, if Udi, you'll click, is to break that wall down between, and that's what we believe that MT is one of those solutions. All right, let's take a look at the third area on the next slide. And that's the tactic we see lots of companies, especially high-tech companies in Silicon Valley and in Seattle and on the East Coast who have extra money to throw at the problem. They'll continue to add more external resources hoping to solve the problem. So they'll send it to those of you in the audience who are language service providers, pay your teams a lot to do all of these reviews, but in the end may not be still, again, matching customer requirements. The problem with this is that even the companies that are flush with cash oftentimes will end up growing things to the point that it attracts the attention of their chief financial officer or procurement. And the last thing that you want is for someone else to mandate cuts that will affect your ability to scale linguistic quality. So there's a real danger here, as even when the function is externalized. All right, Udi, if you go on to the next slide. And bring up, we've covered the first three areas appearing on this slide that Udi will bring up, recognizing that the larger budgets don't always solve this, conflicting views of quality, and adding external resources. Number 4 there, though, reconsidering your quality goals, whether you're the buyer or whether you're working with buyers to attempt to do this. What happens is that we recommend that people really take a step back and reconsider their organization's real goals in the realm of quality. So, what phrases, I'd ask you in the audience if you're a buyer, what phrases do you choose to describe how you handle linguistic quality when speaking with colleagues and executives? If you say things like highest quality possible within budget, or we've solved that issue with outsourced review teams, then we always know that those are signs that you need to take a step back to focus on who should be setting your quality specifications. And that's what you see in number 5, is you've got to figure out ways to reach your prospects and customers directly, because they ultimately determine the appropriate level of quality for delivery, not the third-party review teams or in-country staff delivering their version of what they think is the best quality. Now, these prospects and customers have found you, so you should be able to find them. We hear a lot of companies say that's still difficult, but we think that it's simply because they haven't thought enough about the process. So, Udi, if you'll bring up the next slide, this is where you need the 5th area on reaching out to your prospects and customers directly, is to determine what meeting local expectation means. So you see the 2 women, obviously from different areas of the world, but still, shopping and spending their money. So again, as I said, your customers and prospects have found you, so they're out there and willing to talk once you find ways to engage with them on their turf and to ask them. So the first one that Udi brought up there, the first bullet, is to make sure that you mine your sales and customer data. You should never assume that one market is like another, or even that certain socioeconomic segments resemble one another in one market, especially if you're trying to sell to these distinct classes or marketing to people who have only recently gained access to spending power. For example, you need to take a look and see if your current customers are switching to localized versions of your product when they become available, or are they sticking with the original? And if they are, you need to figure out why. What search terms are potential customers using to find your site? You need to work with your big data mavens in your companies and with your in-country staff to uncover the answers to these questions and others through web analytics and other sources of business intelligence. And once you really kind of sort through things, you should be able to see the trends and what could help you reach these people more faster and with what they need. The second area, of course, is to go social. You need to be active on social media platforms. You need to listen to what other people are saying, attend more conferences, recruit translation crowds, check in with your user groups, and set up buyer councils. You can engage local market research even through your local language service providers to spend time with current and potential customers in places where they gather, whether that could be internet cafes in emerging markets, shopping areas, community centers, religious gatherings, whatever applies to your product. The third, as I mentioned, is to turn your LSPs and turn to your language service providers and your in-country resources. You can use them to help you obtain feedback from local prospects and clients. You can quiz your in-country employees about what local and regional competition is doing better than your company. You can ask if you have local channel partners or marketing agencies, you can ask them to specifically identify hard to recognize local trends that you may be missing even with your own employees. So in conclusion, this is sort of a whirlwind tour of all this, but linguistic quality should not be a straitjacket. It shouldn't be applied to all content and all markets in the same way. I know specifically for me, I've lived in Turkey for the last decade and a half and watched that country go through, its changes in internet time. And the Turks many times are forget perfect quality, just get us the products. If there are a few strings in English or, something isn't perfect, it doesn't matter. We want to be able to use and to have access. So throwing money and external resources at the overabundance of content required on numerous delivery platforms, it just doesn't scale over time. So rather than emphasizing the downstream role of an in-country review team and expecting them to save the day, language teams, both at language service providers and at buyers, need to build processes that allow their prospects and customers to be the ultimate gatekeepers of quality. And we're not saying it's easy, but really in today's world, as time goes on, you have no choice, especially as the millennials all over the world are the ones who come to control most of the money and the buying power. Okay, Udi, it's back to you to reveal how companies can implement machine translation to shift this quality paradigm so that it's no longer such a paradox for them.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rebecca. And a great introduction for us. So I'll go through this, and I see, by the way, there are already some questions. So we will address all the questions very soon as we go through a few of the points. Maybe some of the next points may answer your questions, so please bear with us. So as Rebecca mentioned, there is a gap. There is, and she went as far as to refer to it as a paradox. I think it's more of a misunderstanding than a paradox. The world has changed, and linguistic standards have not. I would not expect an artist to change the way they view their art just because an empire has come and gone. But the reality is that the gap that's been created is that the linguistic or the language industry still measures translation based on certain quality metrics. Things like automatic scores. We have some examples like Blue or Meteor or TR, adequacy and fluency, productivity of translators, and so on and so forth. Language industry really brings an insider point of view, which is fine. It's the expert. But the question for the business today, for global businesses, is this really what I need? And they're finding more and more that it's not. Because what they want to know is if the translation is usable, if I can see through usability means I actually see that there is an increase in the number of hits as a result of publishing a translated content, or I see a reduction in time to resolution if it's technical documents or customer support documents relating to billing process, or call deflection rates of my call centers. The KPIs exist on the business to measure just what the potential impact or what the actual impact is of translated content or multilingual content published. So the business point of view conflicts with the language industry point of view, and that wall that Rebecca presented between those two conflicting views needs to come down. Now, that's an easy thing to say. Question is, how do you do that? How do you transform an entire industry to meet the new waves of consumer behavior? So here's something that got us to start thinking. When we looked at two machine translation systems, very different, you could consider these as two different technologies, two different vendors, or maybe even two systems providing translations for different languages. Doesn't matter. But we broke them up. We compared two systems based on a simple breakdown. How many perfect translations did the machine translation actually produce? These are translations that when we presented them to translators, to editors, they said, you know, maybe my style is different, but I don't need to touch this. This is good language. Then there was another ranking, which was called understandable, not usable. Usable is everything above it, but let's call it usable for now. What else is usable? Meaning, what else can be used in the particular scenario? So in the case it goes to post-editing, for example, it would be more effective to edit than to translate from scratch, which means there are minor changes, maybe a word missing, maybe a punctuation mismatch, maybe some style, incorrect style of text. For example, it's not bold where it should be, or incorrect quotation marks, or things like that. So things which are fairly easy to correct. And then residual is basically, in other words, junk, meaning machine translation, because it learns from examples, it may not have enough examples to learn everything, and as a result, it would produce bad translations, because it tries to produce the translations for absolutely everything. So that's fine. And if you look at these two systems, and you think to yourself, what would I prefer working with, or what would actually be more cost-effective, I'm pretty sure that everyone sees the obvious, that machine translation B is better than machine translation A. The reality is that they're priced almost exactly the same in the market, and they're used almost exactly the same. There's just not that level of differentiation. So let's jump forward, and we'll get back to that with some insights. So we realize that there's a need to make the transition from quality to usability. Consumers want usable information. The language industry produces the highest quality translations they can. But how do you bridge that gap? So the first thing missing was a metric. We thought, okay, Blue, Meteor, all these things. By the way, Meteor was invented by our CTO, by Alon Levy. Our team here has been deeply involved in linguistic quality analysis and automatic metrics. But it's great for analyzing just how well the MT solution that you're building is compared to other things that you're trying to do. It's not so great when you're talking business. So the first thing we needed is to create a completely new metric, something that would transform quality to usability, or explain quality in terms of usability. And we call it the upscale. And the upscale basically stands for understandable or usable, usable and perfect scale, which measures things on a very subjective way. And I'll explain how that works. Then the process. We needed to introduce a process or a technology, which we call comprehension and usability estimations, that will put the quality estimation measures to work, meaning we will need to actually assess on a sentence-by-sentence level whether it is perfect, understandable, or residual, so that we know how to use it or if to use it. And finally, put together a solution that combines machine translation that now has to strive for better and better quality together with the usability aspect to produce the business value that's expected from the business that actually decides to use MT. So there was a process involved from the metric through the technology and putting together a solution. Let me explain how that worked. First of all, the metric. The upscale, we realized that we need a subjective view linking quality and usability, meaning translations for a particular consumer may be usable or less usable because of the nature of the specific consumer. For example, if the content is designed, say it's marketing content, it's designed for publication and represents the brand value, say a website, and the content produced by MT is intended for editing, then the consumer is the editor. Okay? The consumer is the linguist. And then the subjective view of the linguist needs to be taken into consideration. On the other hand, if the content is user-generated content and it's, say, a chat application where two people are conversing over a chat application, each seeing and communicating in their own language, the usability would be defined very differently. People would have would allow for more mistakes, such as spelling mistakes and other things, as they do with just real-time communications. So we had to design a technology that can reflect that, but not move away from how potentially linguists would define translation quality, and still be subjective and reflect the user's perspective on quality, which actually means usability. That was not an easy task. It took us the bulk of last year to figure this one out, but we did. And what we do is this. We introduce this new technology called Q, which is actually just as complex and sophisticated as statistical machine translation itself, if not more so. It introduces machine learning capabilities, artificial intelligence, statistical models, a lot of the things that machine translation has itself, but it stands as a completely separate component. And what happens is very simple. Machine translation produces raw MT, say 5,000 representative segments or sentences. And we provide a user, and the user could be a linguist, could be customer support representative that knows their audience, or could be the actual content consumer, or anyone else for that matter. And we ask them to edit the text, meaning edit it to a level that they're happy reading it, that they can use it. If it's technical support material, that they can go through steps 1 through 4 and their printer is working again, and so on and so forth. Or they can understand what is being sold, or they can understand what the main message is, or why I should buy from this vendor rather than another. And what we found, and I'll go back to the quality features in a second, but what we found is that perspective is very important. When you present raw MT to a professional, and we did this, we actually saw this in a particular Fortune 100 company, the customer support representative that is supposed to know their audience and what things they would be able to use in their self-service application actually evaluated roughly 64% of the content to be usable or understandable for the end client. When you present the same content to the end client, they claim it's actually 83%. The end client actually shows that they're willing to accept less or imperfect or less perfect content because they are understanding it, because it's useful, because they took steps 1 through 4 and the printer was working. So the fact that there was a vowel missing, or there was an incorrect grammar, or there was a word missing, or there was incorrect punctuation, they didn't even notice it, let alone worry about it. So it's not to say that raw MT is the best approach every time, but in this particular case, it showed us that there is a way of linking quality and usability, as long as we take the user perspective into consideration. So we built a mechanism that uses a lot of quality features, nearly 20 acceptable quality features that can characterize a segment or a sentence. Many things such as how commonly do words and phrases occur in the training data that we use, or the average source word length, or the source and target punctuation count. And we categorize all these edited sentences, say 5,000 raw MT edited sentences. We categorize each one not based on their quality, but based on all these quality features. And then whenever we see a new sentence comes through for translation or comes out of raw MT, we can automatically categorize it with very high accuracy into either perfect, there is unlikely to be any editing required, understandable, meaning the intended user would be happy with it, or residual, meaning nobody's going to understand it, you decide what you want to do with it. maybe produce a human translation, or don't use it, or use it with a disclaimer, do whatever you want. But you have the option because all of a sudden you know what you're getting. So then the question was about the solution. So how do we use this thing? And we realized that a combination of a high-quality machine translation solution that uses a lot of adaptation technologies and capable of producing very highly accurate translations representing the brand and a specific domain language, combined with comprehension and usability estimations, can introduce all sorts of new things, like dynamic and tiered pricing for post-editing. You can decide, like some companies that we work with do, to avoid post-editing altogether for estimations of perfect translations, or to send it only for proofing, or to negotiate a similar price to exact TM matches, exact translation memory matches. And the same goes with understandable translations. We know the user can use them as is. Now, if you need to bring them up a notch to a higher quality level, higher quality linguistic level, that's fine. But you can negotiate the price for that differently than just a flat discount, which is what's common in the market today. The interesting thing is that until now, what we've been hearing is, aren't all MT systems pretty much the same? Some would do better on some sentences, others would do better on others. And the reality is that when you break it up into perfect, understandable, and residual, different MT systems look very, very different, vastly different. And when you need to post-edit the content produced by different systems, those that would produce perfect translations, high percentage of perfect translations, would have an enormous impact on translation or post-editing costs. And those that produce more understandable translations would also have an important impact. So the jumping from residual to perfect can really change the cost of editing or how usable the content is in real-time applications, such as chat, e-commerce, building real-time knowledge bases, and other engagement solutions. So the numbers down here, by the way, the cost numbers for post-editing are based on ROI models that we've worked on over the past few months. They reflect reality. There are certain assumptions behind them. I'm not going to go into that. But the difference between saying, okay, I'm using MT, it's probably a good MT, so I'm going to get 15% discount rather than 10%, or 20% rather than the 15%, that's all nice. But the reality is we've actually seen how you can reduce 50, 60, and 70% not of human translation costs, but from editing costs. Simply by introducing transparency over the actual quality and usability of machine translation for your intended consumers. So the paradox is starting to be dissolved. So how do we use Q? There's another couple of interesting components here. So first of all, you need to start from the best machine translation solution. Obviously, I'll tell you that that's the FABA, but you need to try it for yourself. The best MT is actually a very important point, because by introducing this transparency layer, by exposing just how usable translations really are, we're really setting ourselves for a big challenge. It puts the pressure on machine translation vendors and technologies out there to prove that they actually produce more usable and perfect translations for the intended consumer. So we are, at FABA, are happy to be under the gun. But here's how you use it. You can introduce intelligent routing using translation management systems or other applications where you use machine translation for. You can decide what you're using each segment for, whether you're editing or proofing, publishing in raw form, dropping, removing, introducing disclaimers, using in one application rather than the other. You can actually decide what you're doing with each segment based on its usability level. And the other thing you can start doing is really control your pricing better. You can introduce tiered pricing for post-editing, as I've discussed before, but you can also require dynamic pricing from machine translation vendors, something that we at FABA are happy to pioneer. Meaning every residual translation on a sentence level, you will pay absolutely zero because we were not successful, period. And I would love to see other vendors accept this challenge. And for every perfect translation, of course, we will charge much more because you can avoid the very high editing costs. So the models, the pricing models for machine translation start to transform. Post-editing models are more reflective of TM pricing models, and machine translation models are more reflective of the usability of what they produce. And finally, the ability to rapidly adapt is another thing that we've introduced, is the ability basically to learn very, very quickly and transition more understandable translations into perfect and more residual into understandable, and push all these things up the scale by learning in real time from editors and from feedback and from surveys. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So MT, all of a sudden, at the very least for real-time applications, but in many cases, also including post-editing scenarios, is not plugged into the solution. It actually becomes a solution because it evaluates itself and tells you what you can do with it, and can push costs down dramatically on post-editing, which is 95% of your cost structure as far as publication is concerned, which allows you to free up money to pay more for better MT, which is really, in all honesty, why we've been doing this. We want to be able to charge more for better technology. So Alphaba's Enterprise Translator basically says, from now on, don't settle for a discount. You can take control over your localization needs because now you have all these components in place. You have the machine translation solution that adapts very, very accurately to enterprise language. In fact, some of our clients are reporting that post-edited MT from Safaba is higher quality, not usability, again, measured in quality, linguistic quality measurements, higher quality than the human translations that they produce with the same vendors. And that actually did not surprise us because machine translation, one of its benefits is that it's not as smart as a human. And therefore, it has to produce more consistent content because it has more limited options. It does not have the artistic freedoms that a human does. So consistency is introduced for vocabulary and terminology, while the human editing deals mostly with grammar and fluency, leading to much more consistent, better quality results. Then the pre-translated job, basically machine translation and translation memory reduce the residual translations, allowing you to assess just how much effort is really required and what would be the cost that you can now negotiate with your vendors for every document, for every job, for every project, or just overall, using the upscale as a currency. Saying, I have a machine translation solution that is 64/24. That is worth a 34% discount. So you can still go with a flat discount, or I'm going to pay you for for proofing every perfect translation, just like I do have the same agreement with you for every exact match that comes out of TM. You'll be surprised just how close they are. In fact, this is a good place to mention that we've experimented and found that machine translation produces more accurate translations than fuzzy matches coming out of TM. If the machine translation is highly adaptive, and it's provided not just with the what's called new words, which is under, say, the 70-75% fuzzy matches from TM, but goes all the way to 99%. The fuzzy matches are less accurate than the machine translation counterpart, simply because this is exactly the material that machine translation was trained upon. So when you're thinking of machine translation, this is maybe a topic for a completely different discussion. When you think of machine translation, what actually machine translation is being used for is to translate content that it has hardly ever seen. You train it on one thing, and you say, everything I trained you on, I'm going to run through translation memory and ask for fuzzy matches, but everything that you haven't quite seen, I'm going to ask you to do a good job on. Think about it. Okay. Then once you have the currency, you can bid on the open market. or you can reach different types of agreements with your vendors. And finally, you can complete the job at an optimal price and an anticipated price and speed, because you know how much effort is actually required. You know how much perfect translations are in there. You know how many understandable translations. You've decided what to do with them and how to price them. So you have much more control over the process. And finally, learn from the feedback. Everything that is edited or is translated from scratch goes back to the system immediately, learning and not repeating the same mistakes, pushing the currency up. So when we say highest quality machine translation, which we still do on our website, which is just about to transform in the next month, when we say quality, we actually mean the highest percentage of perfect translations and highest percentage of usable translations. From a user perspective, this means we're transforming or moving from traditional quality metrics to usability metrics. And the metric that we put together is the upscale, which is forcing us to produce more usable content cheaper and faster for global companies to reach their goals in a more effective way. So with that, and I realize this is only an introduction, and this can be a very interesting and innovative subject. We first dealt with a paradox, and then we're introducing ways of resolving that paradox, but in the process, we can't help but potentially transforming this market. First by using MT, then by adopting more MT, and finally by having MT drive new pricing models and new engagement models in the market by introducing Q. So with that, before we go to Q&A, and we'll have at least 10 minutes for Q&A, I would like to introduce our polls for today. And let's see if I can actually do that, because this is the first time I'm doing this. I'm going to publish one question, and I ask you to respond to this poll. And we'll do a poll question within the next few seconds. And then I'll run the next poll question. So the first question was, is your organization using or considering using MT? And we already have 46% saying that they are current users, or that they are, or 23% that are in current evaluation. So for a total of nearly 70% that are definitely already in motion with MT. I'll switch over to the other poll. Another poll question. And the next question is, which applications for MT are most likely for you to use? The question is phrased a little bit differently, but let's take a few seconds to respond to that. And I can guess the trend. I can anticipate the answers here. It'll be interesting to see if it's any different than what I expect. And while you're responding to this poll question, I will say that what we see, MT early adoption is mostly in the technical documentation space. The drive is mainly that most of this documentation is, it's an enormous amount of content, and most of it is either not translated, at least not into many languages, or is translated at different formats, meaning shorter, less content provided to different clients based on demand. And MT really introduces the ability to translate this, plus the belief that machine translation is far more useful in consistent technical content, which is somewhat true but not completely true. And I see that the responses here range from 25% multilingual customer support, 67% technical product manuals, 42% translated knowledge bases, and 33% of attendees are looking at website translation using MT. So pretty much as expected. I can tell you that highly adaptive MT, which is what Safaba offers, is also extremely useful in the space of marketing, which I know many of you might find as a surprise. Okay, so with those polls in place, I'd like to switch over to the questions and see, try to go through the questions that we have, and I'll start with the first question. I'll read them out, and I will respond. And Rebecca, feel free to add
Okay.
any thoughts that you may have. I'm sure they'll be very insightful. So the first question we get is, as we presented at first, we said that consumers have an increased tolerance to imperfect language, and the question is, says who? How has this been determined? And yet there have been studies saying that even a single error on a landing page lowers sales by as much as 50%. As a follow-up question. So I want to address both of these. So let me start by saying that we've actually been involved or have seen different approaches by companies today that are taking a leap and basically trying this out. And this is what they've done. There is one company that we work with, a Fortune 100 company that I would not name, that have sent our machine translation results to their linguist. And the linguist said, look, this is good, we can edit this, but we would not publish any of this as is, in raw form. Now, this was technical support content. So the same company said, you know what, okay, good feedback, let's send this to the technical support team and ask them what they think. The technical support team said, yeah, we can publish a lot of this. Our consumers would actually be happy with having a lot of this content available in the way it's presented, but it's not going to be more than 60 or 70% of what's been translated. So the same company took another step and introduced surveys online, basically published the raw empty content and requested feedback from the content consumers. And guess what? Well over 90% of the content was considered to be usable. So this is a good example of when companies say, okay, we're going to figure out how much we can publish, because we know that for every support article we can publish, there's a direct dollar impact. We can reduce staff in local, in-country call centers. We can get more people engaged in self-service. So we really need to know. We cannot just rely on one person's opinion. And as they've seen, the farther they are from the consumer, the less enthusiastic the advisor or the reviewer is about publishing raw MT. So that was insightful for us and a good example. Many companies have done that. We've worked with one that has done that very, very well, and they continue to use usability surveys. Another example, we've seen eBay launch their multilingual program using MT last year, and they've seen something very interesting. What they've done basically is they've measured just how many more sales they get with raw MT publications of products that they describe on their e-commerce site, and redirect to different MT solutions depending on redirect traffic to MT solutions depending on just how much they sell. Okay, not how well the quality is, not how high the quality is, or how usable it's perceived to be. And what they found is an increase of hundreds of millions of dollars in sales by publishing absolutely raw MT, which means their consumers, and this is e-commerce, granted, but their consumers are saying it's good enough for us. So they actually proven that imperfect language, and a lot of it is imperfect on the far end of the scale because it's user-generated content, is good enough for their consumers when translated by machine translation, raw MT. Okay? There have been other trials, and I'm sure maybe there's some specific research that Rebecca can refer us to that shows a very clear direction that consumers really want access to usable information right now, and how good the language is may be less of an impact. And it's true, to the second point on this question, that errors, depending on what errors, but errors could introduce a negative customer experience. But the availability of content introduces business value, which is usually far more immense than an error here or there.
I think the key is determining, for your own customers and prospects what it is. Because eBay's customers may be different than the person who asked the question. But I think what's really important is that you don't assume going out the gate that it really has to be 99% perfect. It isn't possible to scale that way today. It just isn't. And I think it's also important to look at, who those customers are, what age they are, their goals, et cetera, et cetera. So now that we have access to data that we can actually figure those things out as companies, I think it behooves us on the localization side to not always be jumping up and down and saying, oh, we've got to translate everything and everything has to be perfect. It doesn't. We have to figure out, how to spend that money the best way that we can for the companies for which we work.
Right. Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for that. And yeah, this is exactly why we were truly searching, and I can tell you it's been an immense effort, searching for a way to evaluate the subjective view, the user's perspective on usability. In some cases, like Rebecca is saying, you have to know who your users are, who the consumers are, because some consumers would rather not buy from you if there's an error on your website. Because it may represent it may present you in the wrong light. And for certain consumers, for certain lines of business, or for certain content types, it makes more sense to have the content available in multilingual form than it does not. It introduces higher business value. And I guess this is really what our starting point in this journey was. Understanding where the business value is, not starting from evaluating quality or translation process, but saying what would reduce the number of calls going into this call center? What would increase the usability of self-service for this company? Can we introduce a higher number of hits that lead to their lead generation or their sales goals? Just getting onto the website and seeing errors which are unacceptable by people are obviously not a good goal to target. So yes, it very much depends on the consumer, on the user. You need to know your users. But what we've seen more and more, and we see that as a trend, which is why I presented it as a trend in the first place, we see an increased tolerance. People are using Google Translate all the time. They're happy with it. They're happy with it as a consumer, on a consumer basis, which means they're using it all the time. They're introducing that tolerance, or it's a sort of ongoing shift towards acceptance, that knowing and having knowledge of the information, having accessibility to the information that's required is a bit more important and becoming more and more important than having a perfect or a profound user experience.
Well, and one thing that we found with our research is that they're not always happier with Google Translate, but it's out there and they're going to use it anyway. So if you as a company aren't aren't translating enough of your content, you're really, ceding control to Google Translate. So is it better to do that, or is it better, to adopt something like Safaba, a solution like that, so that you can actually get more content out there that's usable? That's what we're finding on our side.
Okay, so there's a multi-part question here that I think we've addressed. So I will not go back to it. Any other questions from the audience? This is a perfect time with the last 35 seconds to introduce additional questions. While we're waiting,
I actually have one.
Yes, please.
Quickly, and that is, so is the stuff that you've worked out, will it only work on English, or does it work on other languages, your Q and your UP?
So it works on any language combination, just like statistical machine translation, because it learns from examples. It does not really care what those examples are. We've so far tested it on English into other languages. So if you want a higher level of confidence that it works and provides a high level of accuracy, then that's what I can commit to at this point in time. But there is no inherent limitation in what kind of language combinations you can use with it.
Okay.
It's a great question. Thank you for that. Okay, so with that, I hope we've introduced the quality paradox and Safaba's approach to addressing it. There are a lot of different aspects to this. We've also incorporated a crowdsourcing solution for post-editing and have measured its impact, and have seen that even when we have non-professionals editing machine translation, still the rate of acceptance of content by consumers is much higher, or almost as high as professional translation. Certainly everybody would like to read very readable language, as perfect as possible. But the business reality is that that's not attainable for the amount of content that's growing and the channels, the real-time channels that are required by companies today to engage with their market, with their consumers, with their partners, and even for static content, such as static as it can be, such as websites and marketing collateral or product documentation. The opportunity to use MT once you know what you're publishing and price it correctly, and taking ownership over your localization needs, is an opportunity that has presented itself by addressing the paradox itself. So with that, I'd like to thank Rebecca very much for joining and for all those wonderful insights, and for everyone else for joining us today. We have recorded this webinar, or at least I believe we have, and we will make that recording available in a follow-up email to all attendees. And I thank you very much for your time and your patience with me operating this very sophisticated technology that I got introduced to today. GoToMeeting, and thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you in our upcoming webinars in the next few weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eddie.